I still remember the moment that phone call came in, and how a single sentence tore open a wound I didn't know could still bleed. My son's voice carried excitement, almost pride, as he said, "Mom, we finally did it. Clara and I got married this morning." My heart jumped, waiting for the details. Where, with whom, how. And then he added, almost casually, "It was a very small ceremony. Only special people were there. Only special people." The words echoed like a cruel verdict. I was not special. I was not needed. I was not even invited to witness the union of my only son. I felt the phone slip slightly in my hand as the blood drained from my face. I tried to mask my devastation, tried to sound supportive, but my voice cracked in ways I couldn't control. After hanging up, I sat in silence, staring at the walls that had heard every laugh, every tear, every lullaby I ever sang to that boy. And now those walls echoed back to me one truth. I was no longer family. I was no longer mother. I was an outsider. The following days were worse than the call itself. Neighbors mentioned seeing cars parked outside my son's house, family friends posted photos on social media, smiling faces, flowers, a modest yet beautiful gathering. Clara in her white dress, Max in a suit I had never seen before. Laughter frozen in photographs where I didn't exist. It wasn't just an oversight, it was deliberate. And what stung the most was not Clara's absence of an invitation, but my son's silence, his compliance. The boy I raised, the boy I sacrificed everything for, had erased me from the most important day of his life. I drowned myself in rationalizations at first. Maybe it was spontaneous, maybe the guest list was truly small, maybe they didn't want to burden me. But deep down I knew. Clara had always been uncomfortable with me. To her, I was a reminder that my son had a past, that he had loyalties beyond her orbit. She wanted me reduced to a background figure, a wallet, a caretaker when convenient. And Max, oh Max, he was too weak, too eager to please, to resist. My days became heavy with silence, but my nights, those were unbearable. I replayed every moment of motherhood. The times I went without food so Max could have new shoes. The hours of overtime at the factory, the skipped vacations, the dreams deferred. And for what? To be told, without words but with actions, that I was not special. Weeks passed. I continued sending the monthly transfers into Max's account, the financial lifeline that had kept them afloat for years. Rent, car repairs, Clara's emergencies. They always had a reason. I told myself it was my duty, that this was what mothers did. But each time I saw the deduction from my account, it was no longer just numbers. It was respect leaving my life. It was dignity bleeding out. One evening, Clara called, her voice laced with false sweetness. "Ruth, the fridge broke down. Could you help us out? It's really urgent, and Max is so stressed." I wanted to scream that I was stressed too, that I lived alone in a house too big for one, that my knees ached, that I had my own bills, my own fears. But instead I agreed, transferring another sum I couldn't afford to lose. She didn't thank me. She simply said, "We'll pay you back soon," a promise that had become a script with no intention behind it. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning. I received a letter from my bank, a routine statement. Out of curiosity, I totaled the amounts I had sent Max and Clara over the past 3 years. $33,400. I read the number again. My hands trembled. That wasn't help. That was my retirement, my safety, my security. And for what? A son who excluded me. A daughter-in-law who saw me as a bank machine. I remember standing in the kitchen, staring at the kettle boiling, steam filling the room like the anger filling my chest. I whispered to myself, "No more." It was the first time I had said those words out loud, and they scared me. Because no more meant confrontation. It meant admitting, even to myself, that my son no longer loved me for me, only for what I provided. The next time Clara called, Asking for a little help with the electricity bill, I inhaled deeply, my heart pounding, and said, "I can't do this anymore." Silence. Then laughter, sharp and dismissive. "Ruth, stop being dramatic. Max is your son. You can't just stop." I hung up without another word, my hands shaking but my spine straighter than it had been in years. I thought the storm would pass, that maybe they'd cool down and reflect. Instead, the storm came to my doorstep. 3 days later, I returned from grocery shopping to find Clara and Max waiting outside my house with a tall man in a suit. My son wouldn't even meet my eyes. Clara stepped forward, her tone commanding. "This is Mr. Howard, our lawyer. We need to discuss your finances." My groceries slipped from my arms, oranges rolling down the driveway. "My finances?" I managed. Mr. Howard spoke with rehearsed politeness. "Mrs. Ruth, your son and daughter-in-law are concerned about your ability to manage your estate. Given your recent changes in behavior, they believe it may be in your best interest to grant them power of attorney. This will protect you and ensure your resources are managed responsibly." I stared at him, then at Max. My own son, standing silently, allowing this man to suggest I was incapable of handling my own life. "Behavior?" I whispered. Clara crossed her arms, her eyes cold. "You've been erratic, Ruth. Cutting off transfers without explanation, installing cameras like you're paranoid, avoiding family gatherings. Max is worried. We're both worried." I wanted to shout that I was protecting myself from them, not from shadows, but the words stuck in my throat. I turned and walked inside, slamming the door, locking it as their voices rose outside. "You can't hide from this forever, Mom," Max shouted, his voice echoing through the door like a stranger's. That night, I didn't sleep. Every creak of the house felt like an invasion. Every shadow on the wall reminded me that the people I loved most were planning my downfall. I called Eleanor, my oldest friend, my neighbor for 30 years. Through tears, I explained everything. The wedding, the money, the lawyer. She listened quietly, then said with a firmness I hadn't heard in myself for years, "Ruth, they're trying to break you. But you're stronger than this. You need help, not theirs, but real help. Call a lawyer tomorrow. Protect yourself." The next morning, I made the hardest call of my life. Not to my son, but to a legal office. The receptionist's calm voice felt like a lifeline. "We'll schedule you with Mr. Weber. He specializes in elder financial protection." When I hung up, my chest tightened with both fear and relief. Fear, because I knew this would ignite a war. Relief, because for the first time in years, I wasn't surrendering. I was preparing to fight. The following week became a blur of fear and determination. I kept my curtains closed, afraid of seeing Max's car outside. Every ring of the phone made my heart pound. I didn't know if it would be Clara demanding money, or worse, that lawyer of theirs trying again to pressure me. But beneath the fear, a fire had been lit. For too long I had lived on scraps of love, buying pieces of affection with dollar bills. Now I had finally admitted to myself that it had all been one-sided. That realization was painful, but it was also freeing. When the day of my appointment with Mr. Weber arrived, I felt like I was walking into a new life. He was a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a steady tone that immediately calmed me. I sat across from him, my hands trembling, as I poured out everything, the money I had given, the wedding I had been excluded from, the cruel phrase, "only special people," and now the attempt to paint me as unstable so they could control what little I had left. He didn't interrupt. He just listened, occasionally jotting notes on a yellow pad. When I finally stopped, my throat raw from holding back tears, he leaned forward and said, "Ruth, you're not the first person to face this. What your son and his wife are trying to do is called financial coercion. It's abusive and it's not legal. But you must be prepared. They won't give up easily. The fact that they involved a lawyer shows how far they're willing to go." The word abusive stung. I had always thought of abuse as bruises, shouting, violence. But this slow erosion of dignity, of autonomy, of love, was a wound all its own. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You protect yourself," he replied firmly. "You close every financial door they can use. You change your locks if you have to, and you stop explaining yourself to people who don't want to understand." That night, I sat at my dining table with a pen and paper, listing everything I needed to do. Cancel joint authorizations. Remove Max from my emergency contacts. Speak to the bank about flagging suspicious activity. Even consider rewriting my will. Each step felt like a betrayal. But then I reminded myself, hadn't they betrayed me first? The very next morning I went to the bank. The branch manager, Mr. Klein, greeted me as he always did, with a kind smile. But when I told him what I needed, to block Max and Clara from ever accessing my accounts again, his smile faded into a look of quiet concern. "Are you sure, Mrs. Ruth?" he asked gently. "This is a very final step." "Yes," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my tone. I should have done it years ago. As the paperwork was signed, I felt lighter. It was as though invisible chains had been removed from my wrists. But even as relief washed over me, fear lingered, because I knew what would come next. That evening, the storm arrived. Max showed up at my door, his eyes red with anger. Clara was beside him, her arms crossed, her mouth tight with fury. They didn't even knock politely. They pounded on the door until the frame rattled. "Mom!" Max shouted. "Open the door. We need to talk." I froze in the hallway, clutching the phone in my hand. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush to obey my son's voice. I stayed silent. But silence wasn't enough for Clara. "We know what you did at the bank," she screamed. "You think you can just cut us off like that? After everything we've done for you?" Everything they had done for me. The words would have been laughable if they hadn't been so cruel. What had they done for me except drain me dry, treat me as a nuisance, erase me from their lives when it suited them? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the pounding stopped. I peeked through the curtain to see them walking back to their car, Max gesturing angrily at Clara. For a moment, I saw the boy he once was, the little boy who hugged me when he was scared, who clung to me on his first day of school. But that boy was gone, buried under years of manipulation and dependency. The next morning, I found an envelope shoved under my door. Inside was a note in Clara's handwriting. "You can't survive without us. Don't make this harder than it has to be." My hands shook as I read it. It wasn't just a plea, it was a threat. I took the note straight to Mr. Weber. He read it, frowned, and slid it into a folder. "This is good," he said. "Proof. Keep every message, every voicemail. If they escalate, we'll be ready." Part of me wanted to tear the note into pieces, to erase the evidence of their cruelty. But another part of me felt stronger, knowing I wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in years, someone was standing beside me, not against me. Days turned into weeks, and I began to rebuild small parts of my life. I took walks without guilt. I bought myself a dress with the money I used to send Max, and though it felt strange at first, I allowed myself to smile in the mirror. I reconnected with old friends I had drifted from, ashamed to admit how badly things had gotten. Some were shocked, others saddened, but all of them reminded me of something I had forgotten. I mattered, but Max and Clara didn't disappear. They called from new numbers when I blocked the old ones. They sent letters, some sweet, some venomous, and once I came home to find them sitting on my front steps, waiting like predators. Clara stood as I approached, her smile tight and false. "Ruth, we just want to talk. We can fix this, but you have to meet us halfway." I didn't stop walking. "Go home," I said quietly, unlocking my door. Max reached out as though to touch my arm, but I pulled away. For the first time, I saw pain flash across his face. Not the pain of a son losing his mother, but the panic of a man losing control. Inside, I leaned against the door, breathing heavily. My heart ached. I didn't want to be cruel. I didn't want to cut my son out of my life. But he had left me no choice. I wasn't his mother anymore. I was his bank account, his backup plan, his safety net. And I couldn't carry that burden anymore. That night, my phone rang again. I let it go to voicemail. When I finally checked the message, it was Max's voice, broken and desperate. "Mom, please, just answer. I don't know what Clara told you, but I love you. I can't do this without you." For a moment, my resolve wavered. For a moment, I wanted to believe him. But then I remembered the photos from the wedding, the cold words, "only special people," and the note shoved under my door, promising I couldn't survive without them. I turned off the phone and sat in silence. Silence, I realized, was no longer my prison. It was my shield. The days after that voicemail were some of the hardest I had ever lived. Every memory of Max as a little boy haunted me. His laughter echoing in the backyard, his tiny hand gripping mine on stormy nights, his sleepy face pressed against my shoulder. My heart wanted to believe that voice on the recording was real, that somewhere inside the angry man who now stood at my door, my son was still alive. But my mind reminded me of the truth. Love does not send lawyers to your house. Love does not erase you from its happiest day, and love does not reduce a mother to a dollar sign. Still, the loneliness crept in. I found myself sitting at the dining table staring at the 2 empty chairs where Max and Clara had once eaten dinner, though even then they never looked up from their phones. I brewed coffee in the morning and poured 2 cups out of habit, only to watch one grow cold and untouched. It was in those quiet moments that doubt came crawling back. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was confused, irrational, even selfish. But then I remembered Clara's note. "You can't survive without us." That single sentence killed any trace of guilt, because the truth was the opposite. It was they who couldn't survive without me. One afternoon, while trimming the roses in my garden, I noticed Mrs. Brooks from next door waving at me. She was holding a pie in her hands, her smile warm. "I made too much," she said as she stepped closer. "Would you like some?" Her kindness disarmed me. For years I had been too wrapped up in Max's endless emergencies to notice the people around me. I invited her in, and over coffee and pie I told her everything. At first I worried she might judge me, think me foolish for letting my son take advantage of me for so long. But instead, her eyes softened. "Mrs. Ruth," she said gently, "I went through the same thing. My daughter did it to me. Different details, but the same story. Always needing help, always promising it would be the last time. I nearly lost my home before I finally said no." My heart ached hearing her words, but it also gave me comfort. I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only mother blinded by love, tricked into thinking sacrifice was the same as affection. And when she told me that her daughter eventually returned, not for money, but for love, I felt a spark of hope. That night, I lay awake in bed thinking about Mrs. Brooks's story. Could Max ever come back to me like that? Could he ever see me as more than a wallet? Or had Clara poisoned him beyond repair? The questions spun endlessly, leaving me restless. By dawn, I had made up my mind. If they were going to keep coming at me, I had to be ready. The next day, I called Ethan, the security installer Mr. Brooks had recommended. Within hours, cameras were mounted at every corner of my house, and a new lock system was installed on my doors. For the first time in years, I felt safe. As Ethan showed me how to check the live feed from my phone, I thought to myself, I am no longer defenseless. If Max and Clara wanted to wage a war, then I would not fight with tears. I would fight with preparation. The very same evening, the cameras proved their worth. At 9 p.m., long after dark, I got a notification on my phone. My hands shook as I opened the app. There they were, standing on my porch again. Max was pacing, Clara standing with her arms crossed, glaring at the door as if she could burn a hole through it. They didn't knock this time. They just stood there waiting. After 10 minutes, they left. The next morning, I found another envelope under my door. This one was shorter, crueler. You think you're strong. You're not. This will end badly for you. I showed the note to Mr. Weber, who slid it into the folder with the first one. They're trying to scare you, he said calmly. But the more they threaten, the more evidence we gather. Don't respond. Don't open the door. Don't answer the phone. Every silence you give them is power you take back. But silence was not easy. Silence at night was a battlefield. I would lie in bed, my chest tight, my mind racing. What if they came when I was asleep? What if they tried to break in? I would sit up clutching my phone ready to call the police. Sometimes I even kept the kitchen light on, just to pretend I wasn't alone in the dark. And then, one afternoon, the phone rang with a number I recognized. It wasn't Max or Clara, it was my sister, Diana, from Chicago. I hadn't spoken to her in months, ashamed to admit how much of my life had been swallowed by Max's needs. But something inside me told me to pick up. Ruth? Her voice was warm, familiar, and immediately brought tears to my eyes. How are you, sister? It's been too long. I don't know why, but the moment I heard her, I broke. I told her everything. The wedding, the lawyer, the money, the threats. I expected shock or pity, but instead she sighed, almost as if she had been waiting to hear this. Oh, Ruth, she said softly. I always knew it was this bad. Every time we talked, you only told me about what you had given Max, what he needed, how proud you were to help. But I never once heard him call me to say how much he loved you. Do you know what he told me at family gatherings? Not my mom is wonderful, or my mom is strong. It was always, my mom paid for this, or my mom bought me that. You were never his mother. You were his provider. Her words struck me like lightning. A part of me wanted to deny it, to argue, but deep down I knew she was right. Max had stopped seeing me as a mother long ago. I had let him. Do you know what else I noticed? Diana continued. Clara always spoke about you in the future tense. When Ruth is gone, when we inherit, when we sell the house, as if your life was already over and they were just waiting to cash in. I sat in silence, my heart breaking all over again. They hadn't just seen me as money, they had seen me as temporary, disposable. That night I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea, staring at the steam rising into the air. For the first time, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there with a painful clarity. I had lost Max long before the wedding. I had lost him the moment he learned that my love could be bought and sold, but I wasn't going to lose myself anymore. The following morning, I began a new ritual. I woke early, brewed coffee, and sat by the window to watch the sun rise. I tended to my roses, read books I had long forgotten, called friends I had neglected. Each small act was a reminder my life still belonged to me. But deep down, I knew the battle wasn't over. Max and Clara weren't done. And as much as I tried to rebuild, their shadow still lingered at the edge of my peace. The quiet days after Diana's call gave me a strength I hadn't felt in years. I realized how much of my life had been spent orbiting around Max and Clara, like a planet trapped in the pull of a dying sun. For the first time, I began to feel what it was like to exist outside their gravity. Each morning I woke up to silence, but it was no longer the silence of abandonment. It was the silence of freedom. I started making small changes. I walked into the beauty salon I hadn't stepped foot in for over a year. The stylist looked at me with surprise. Mrs. Ruth, it's been so long, Cynthia said, taking my hand. I thought you'd forgotten about us. I forgot myself, I admitted. But I'm remembering now. For hours I sat in that chair while she cut, colored, and styled my hair. I got a manicure and pedicure too, and when I finally looked in the mirror, I saw not just a woman with fresh hair and painted nails. I saw a woman alive again. The weight that had bent my shoulders was gone. Cynthia smiled. You look beautiful, but more than that, you look free. I left the salon walking taller than I had in years. On the way home, I stopped by a small boutique and bought a dress in a color I hadn't worn since my youth. Red. Bold, unapologetic red. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, put on music, and for the first time in decades, I danced alone in my living room. The walls that had once echoed with arguments and demands now carried only the sound of my laughter. But even as I began to reclaim myself, Max and Clara continued their siege. The phone calls came daily, sometimes from blocked numbers, sometimes from unfamiliar ones. I didn't answer. The letters became harsher, each one laced with more venom than the last. One said, "You think you can win, but you'll regret this. We are your family. You can't erase us." Another said, "When you're old and sick, no one will be there but us. You'll beg for us back." I saved each letter, each voicemail, each message. Evidence, Mr. Weber had called it. To me, it was something else too. Proof that I had done the right thing. Because love doesn't need to threaten. Only desperation does. One evening, as the sun dipped low and bathed my garden in gold, the doorbell rang. My phone vibrated at the same time with a notification from the security camera. I opened the app and there they were, Max and Clara, standing on my porch again. Clara was holding a grocery bag, Max with a strained smile. I didn't open the door. I watched them through the screen. "Mom, please." Max's voice came through faintly even though the glass. "We just want to talk. We brought dinner." Dinner? The same son who hadn't so much as asked how I was for years now wanted to share a meal. Clara chimed in, her voice sugary sweet. "Ruth, let's not fight anymore. Let's start fresh. We made mistakes, but we're family. Family forgives." Her words made me laugh bitterly. Family forgives? Where was forgiveness when they cut me out of their wedding? Where was forgiveness when they hired a lawyer to declare me incompetent? I didn't move. I let them stand there, knocking, pleading, until finally they left the bag of groceries on the porch and walked away. Inside the bag, I found a bottle of cheap wine and 2 frozen dinners. The gesture was hollow, performative. Not love, strategy. Days turned into weeks. My garden bloomed brighter, my nights grew calmer, and slowly, my heart stopped aching every time I thought of Max. One afternoon, Mrs. Brooks came by with her knitting and we sat on the porch together, talking about everything from books to our childhoods. At one point, she looked at me and said, "You're glowing, Ruth, I can see it." "You've taken your life back," I smiled. "I think I finally have." But peace, as always, was fragile. A letter came in the mail one morning, this one not handwritten but official-looking. From a lawyer's office. My heart pounded as I tore it open. Inside was a formal notice. Max and Clara were petitioning for guardianship, claiming I was mentally unfit to handle my own affairs. My hands shook as I read, but then something unexpected happened. Instead of fear, I felt calm. They had shown their hand too soon. They thought they could scare me with paper and signatures, but I had already armed myself with truth, evidence, and the law. I drove to Mr. Weber's office that afternoon and handed him the letter. He skimmed it and smirked. "Empty threats. They don't have the evidence. You're sharp, Ruth. You've documented everything. You've been financially independent for decades. This will collapse before it even begins. If they push, we'll counter. And if it goes to court," he paused, "we'll expose every dollar they drained from you." I left his office with a renewed sense of strength. They couldn't win. Not anymore. That night, I sat in my armchair by the window, watching the moonlight spill across my lawn. For so long I had feared being alone. Max's parting words haunted me. "You'll end up alone with no one to take care of you." But as I sat there, surrounded by silence that was no longer empty but full of peace, I realized the truth. I wasn't alone. I had myself. I had neighbors who cared, a sister who loved me, a community I had neglected but could still return to. What I didn't have, and what I no longer needed, was the constant draining presence of 2 people who had mistaken my love for weakness. When I finally went to bed, I slept deeply, without fear, without doubt. And in my dreams, I didn't see Max as the man who had betrayed me. I saw him as the boy he once was, running through the garden with laughter on his lips. That image didn't hurt anymore. It was a memory, pure and untouchable, a part of my past, but no longer my future. The next morning, as the first light broke through my curtains, I whispered to myself, "It's over. I'm free," and for the first time in years, I truly believed it.